Welcome back to the Good Growth podcast, brought to you by BGF, the UK and Ireland's most active equity investor. Today we're joined by Grant Keenan, founder of Keenan Recycling and leader in sustainable food waste collection. Grant shares how he scaled his family business with BGF's support, growing from a small composting operation to a national company with 21 depots, 140 employees, and most recently a successful exit to BIFFA. We'll explore the challenges of scaling sustainably, securing investment, and preparing for acquisition. If you're a business owner looking to grow, this one's for you.
Grant, welcome to the BGF Good Growth podcast. Can you tell us about you and your company?
Yeah, so I'm Grant Keenan, Managing Director of Keenan Recycling, predominantly an organics waste company. We built a national footprint collecting food waste from every postcode in Scotland, England and Wales, as well as a couple of processing facilities, and we recently exited to BIFFA.
And what is food waste and how is it recycled?
So basically food waste is anything from preparation waste, when chefs prepare soup that have veg peelings, to plate scrapings, or supermarket waste that goes out of date, passes its shelf life. The way it's recycled is we'll collect it, we'll take it to an anaerobic digestion plant. They'll then depackage it, liquefy it, put it in tanks, starve it of oxygen, hence the anaerobic bit. That creates methane gas. They'll then harvest the methane, turn it into liquid, and either pump it into the grid as gas, or they'll use it to make green electricity by running like a generator.
So it's amazing to think of that kind of food waste, sort of doing that. When did you start doing this?
So I've been self-employed since I was 19. I'm 51 now, you can do the math. I went into the recycling garden waste originally in 2002.
Okay.
And then I could see an opportunity for food waste. I saw that opportunity around 2006. Then it took a couple of years to raise the funding to build the facility, and then we started recycling food waste in late 2008, early 2009.
Was there a particular light bulb moment when you were doing that garden waste that you thought food waste is the future?
Yeah, well, because effectively we come across a niche in the organic sector, and I wanted to grow the business. There was plenty of other waste management companies, so I didn't want to diverse into just becoming one of them. I thought our stick to the knitting, our sweet spot is organics, and I knew that food waste was organic, and nobody in Scotland at that time was tackling food waste, so I thought here's a great opportunity that nobody spotted.
So how did you go about those first early years then? How did you persuade people to sort of take this on? Because at the time it wasn't compulsory, right?
No, so originally, if you go back to the garden waste bit, I was operating a garden bark business at the time, and I bought a machine which is mobile to grade the bark, and I went along to the local authority, Aberdeenshire Council, to see if they wanted to hire it, and I was just making conversation with them as I was leaving their yard, and there was a pile of garden waste in the corner, grass cuttings, tree prunings, and I just said to them, what do you do with that? And we said, we'll landfill it. There's nothing we can do with it. And at that time, everybody just landfilled everything. Landfill tax was only £12 a tonne, but I knew that because it was organic and I was composting bark, that I could do something with it. So I just said to them, look, why don't you send it to me instead of landfill? I'll do it for half what it cost you. It was about £30 a tonne at the time.
Yeah.
Then they paid their tipping fee plus the tax. So they put skips aside at the recycling centres, and then I went round to all the other local authorities and said, what do you do with your garden waste? And they said, we'll landfill it. Why? And I said, well, come and see what we're doing for Aberdeenshire Council. And then once we got all the recycling centres, I went back to them and I said, look, why don't you give everyone that's got a garden a wheelie bin? We'll get more diversion from landfill. And then that was how the business grew.
And so what are you doing then when you've got all this kind of garden waste? What was the first steps in terms of not putting it into landfill?
So basically, the lorry will come in to the facility, we shred it, and then put it into what we call long windrows, which are kind of long static piles. and then we turn it using a loading shovel, which oxygenates it, gets the microbes going. It's a thermophilic reaction, so it's just nature doing what it wants to do, which is decompose organic material. That creates a bit of heat, also reduces volume, and it goes from what looks like garden waste to start looking like a brown peaty substance. And then we screen it, so we have to remove the sticks and magnets, take out any metal, or there's stones and things like that. And when sifters, if there's any polythene, then it goes through a nice screen and it creates a BSI, Pass 100 compost that we sell to farmers, landscapers and householders.
So it's amazingly sustainable, obviously. But what are the sort of statistics that you've got around the sustainability aspects of it? You must have done so much over the kind of, going on for 20 years now.
Yeah, well, the big driver was really that when you put organic material into landfill, it rots anaerobically. So it creates methane, and that's 21 times more harmful to the planet than carbon dioxide, so it's got a huge benefit. And even recycling, 2 banana skins can fully charge an iPhone.
Really?
Statistics like that, makes it worthwhile.
Wow. Okay, that's a very interesting. Are there any other stats like that?
There's probably loads. Can't think of something to do with filling football pitches and stuff like that. I've got a guy that does all our net zero stuff. He could reel off the statistics, no problem. Yeah.
And how have you managed that? Because BGF got involved 10 years ago, and you've kind of like grown a huge amount since then, which we'll get into a bit more of that specifically in a moment. But how have you managed the kind of like sustainability aspect? Because obviously you're sort of buying trucks and everything. It's not just about the kind of recycling side. How have you managed that side of the sustainability model?
Yeah, so in the early days, that stuff wasn't really talked about, because, as I said, everyone was just landfilling food and garden waste. So it was enough at that point for us to just say, look, we'll do something better with it. It's more environmentally friendly. And then as the world's moved on and we understand the road to net zero and carbon and trying to get on a green journey, and then we've had a kind of a wake-up call or a light bulb moment when you sort of think, okay, well, what we're doing is green, but we're not doing it in a very green manner because, as you quite rightly said, we've got trucks on the road. So what we committed to a few years ago was, no more diesel trucks. So all the new trucks that we're ordering now are all biomethane. So effectively what happens is we collect the food waste in the truck, take it to the anaerobic digestion plant, they turn it into biogas, we then fuel the truck with it. So effectively, the truck's being powered by the food that it collects. So it's 98% carbon reduction over a diesel truck.
So you've been doing this then for sort of, coming up to 10 years, and that's when you sort of decided to really sort of scale the business and BGF got involved. Talk to us about that process. When did you first meet BGF, and what due diligence did you undertake with BGF?
Yeah, so the way it came about was we had built the vessel facility. So at that point, my brother, he was living in London at the time. He'd come up and joined the business. So he helped with the funding and the running of the plant. So we'd raised 3.2 million for the facility before BGF came in. My father had plugged a finance gap of 500,000, and we got a loan of 500,000 from RAP at the time as well. So we were all involved in it. My wife had joined as well. So
it really is a family business.
So she joined me right in the beginning, running the garden bar business. So it really is a family business. We're all involved in it. So we actually had an offer to sell the business at that point from an AIM listed business, and we weren't really thinking about selling, so we just rejected their offer. Then they made us another offer. We thought, that's interesting, but it still wasn't enough to tempt us out of it. And then they made us a third offer, which we actually accepted. So
what year is this then?
Oh God, that was probably 2013, I think, something like that.
Yep.
And we've been in diligence for about 8 or 9 months, and then eventually we had the date, the money will be in your bank account on this date, which was literally about 6 or 7 weeks away, and then they went into administration. So the deal fell over. And at that point, part of the reason that we'd entertained selling it was we wanted to de-risk a bit, take some cash and go and do something else. And I wanted to get my father paid back his money as well. So at that point, when that had fallen away, we kind of thought, right, well, what are we going to do here? So we thought, well, let's just keep growing the business, but we still had those elements that we wanted to satisfy. So we just through networking, I bumped into a guy called Simon Monroe who set BGF up in Aberdeen in the early days, and we were talking to him, and then he said, you know, you thought about an equity partner, you know, that could be with you for the longer term. And then he spoke about the new model that BGF had, which was allowing cash off the table to the founders. You know, they quite cleverly recognised that historically when entrepreneurs get a business to a certain size, in the early days, they're more kind of, up for risk, and then as they build something significant, become a bit more risk adverse and then take an offer, and then that's it. Whereas they realise that if they give the founders some cash off the table, money for growth, then they're more likely to push to get to the next level.
Because that was quite rare then, wasn't it? The sort of de-risking side of it. I mean, it's become a bit more kind of in vogue, but they were quite up for that then.
Hugely. I mean, previous to that, private equity, all the money went in and it was all about growth for the business. But I think BGF were quite clever that they had recognised that, it's not life-changing money enough to say, I don't need to work anymore, but it's enough to say, I'll pay my mortgage off, I'm comfortable, I can sleep at night and I can get focused and motivated on the business.
It actually weirdly encourages you almost to be riskier again, doesn't it?
Oh, hugely, and that's the
sort of say de-risk, but it's sort of
and that's kind of the whole idea, and it's I think it's quite a comfort as well that. In fact, I can still remember it was Brian Williamson that I mentioned earlier that had said to me when I went to speak to him, the thing was if you get into troubled waters, they've got bigger paddles than we have to get out of any storm. So there was almost that comfort that, okay, we've got a funder at the table. It's not just us and the bank,
Yeah. Well, speaking of troubled waters, COVID comes along a few years later. Yeah. How did that impact the business?
Oh, hugely. It was awful. Some pretty dark times and sleepless nights. I mean,
didn't you have an offer just before that as well?
Yeah, we did. So 2009, we had a really good offer for the business, and we were only in our expansion plans where we were about down to Manchester, so we had a lot still to do. And we looked at what they'd offered us, and we thought that's a lot of money, but imagine how much it'll be once we've got full coverage and the regulations come in. And as a board, we all looked at each other and went, "Why on earth would we sell now?" I remember saying, "What could possibly go wrong?" That was November 2019. And then obviously tip into 2020, and our whole market just evaporated overnight because we service the hospitality sector. Yeah. So all of a sudden it kind of went into turmoil. So fortunately, obviously the government stepped in with their support. So we were able to furlough some of the staff, but we took the decision that we would keep the trucks running for the businesses that needed it, because we still did things like supermarkets, hospitals, prisons. Well, prisons are in permanent lockdown. But there was a need to have it running. The difficulty was that it was costing us the same, we were burning the same fuel, paying the same wages, but we weren't getting that revenue inflow. Yeah. But we felt it was the right thing to do because we didn't want to let the customers down that we wanted it. So there was that, coupled with we took a SAB loan for $1.5 million as well. And we'd built up a really healthy cash cushion in the bank as well.
Yeah.
So I think, as I said to you before, we had a decision to make about, do we batten the hatches and preserve the cash, or do we go on with our expansion plan? And our view was that we would go on with it because the regulations were due to come in 2023, which made it mandatory that every business in England must recycle food.
So let's just explain this, because in 2014, it's mandatory in Scotland, right, which is obviously where you sort of started business and whatever. But it was 2023. It was going to come in for England and Wales, right?
Correct. Yeah. So it's been in Scotland for 10 years, and we saw the impact that makes, because you go from when we started the business and had the idea, people said that's crazy, it'll never work, to fast forward, it's now it's the law. You know, you have to recycle food. So we'd seen what it did for our business in Scotland, and we looked at the potential of England's, 10 times the population. So we thought this will really be worth it if we are positioned so that when the regulations come, we've got every postcode covered. But you can't just turn up in 2023 and proclaim that you're national. You've got to be there at least 2 or 3 years beforehand to get all the depots open, have the people in place, the right culture, values, so it's a stable platform, so that when you put that work on it, it doesn't just fall apart. And to answer your question as well, COVID was hurting us, but we felt we still had to go on with the expansion plan, because if we didn't hit our ambition and our deadline, if the regulations arrive and we're not there, someone else gets that work, and it's virtually impossible to get back. And we had a model that was burning cash every time you open a depot in a new city. You start from zero revenue, you buy 2 trucks, that's £250,000, got to hire 2 drivers and pay them the full week's wage. Then by the time you get that up and off the ground, you're on to your next depot and your next one. So the cash that we had in the bank was just kind of going down and down and down. And there was some sleepless nights where we think, are we doing the right thing here? But that was where BGF were great. They were, no, keep going. We bought another 20 trucks, spent £4 million, opened another 9 depots, kept hiring, trebled the size of our office. While everyone was batting the hatches, we were spending money and expanding.
And what did you learn about growth during that period? Like, what did sort of good growth mean to you? Did you ever open too many too fast, perhaps, or?
I think I learned a lot about people. I think sometimes it's easy for everybody to be your best friend when everything's going well, but when your back's against the wall and things are not going well, I was quite surprised that some of the staff and employees that were maybe mistakenly didn't hugely rate actually came to the forefront and really got behind us and got bought into the journey. And conversely, some of the ones that we thought the shining stars were kind of just fell apart because we weren't, in the good times anymore. So I think it really tests people's mettle. We made some mistakes along the way. Maybe opened a depot in the wrong place, or the thing that we were doing was there wasn't a blueprint for what we did. Nobody had ever done that before. We essentially started from a field in Newdeer in the northeast and built a national business with 21 depots. So it wasn't like we could turn to anyone and say, how did you do that expansion? We had to figure it out as we went. The analogy we used was that we were flying a plane, but we were building it in the air as we flew.
Completely. And what was there a point where it is the Good Growth podcast, so it's always very good to talk about it specifically in terms of when did you, like, how did you sort of approach growth? Like, what's the key thing that you perhaps wish you knew and were advising a business that's investing so much in capex as you were? What would you sort of advise them to think about? What do you wish you'd known?
I could give you my view in our business. I'm not sure I would want anyone to follow my advice. I wouldn't want to be responsible if all goes wrong. But when I was just myself, I was just obsessed with net profit and generating cash, which is 2 very, very healthy metrics, and they're absolutely essential. But what I hadn't really understood until I got involved with BGF and our chairman and our finance director was the exit value of a business, where it was all focused on EBITDA and what multiple of EBITDA can you get, and what's the net debt going to be at that point. And it was far more strategical, so we didn't get quite so hung up on the cash or the net profit. we were focused on building as much EBITDA as we could and creating as much value around the business to attract the highest multiple we could, whilst trying to monitor the debt, but making sure that at the same time we didn't run out of cash and we try or breach banking covenants. So, so I didn't really understand or know any of that at the beginning of the journey, you know. So I think there, if I could have gone back earlier and taught myself that, or any other entrepreneur, I think that's quite useful.
And what else did BGF bring to the table then, aside from the money, right? Like, obviously that's very important.
Yeah.
Were they sort of help you, walk you through that side of it?
Yeah, so I think they helped professionalise the business and get us ready for platform growth. I mean, we already punched above our weight in terms of professionalism, because my father had been involved in private equity and he was our chair at the time. So we were already kind of shaping the business for an exit, and, you know, having proper board meetings and minutes, and everything was documented. But I think what BGF really brought to the table was getting up to the next level. So as part of their investment criteria, they always like to appoint a new non-exec chair. So with a guy called Jim Clark that had come in, which I picked as well. I did interview some other potential chairs that BGF had selected, but Jim's the guy that I really liked, because he'd been a serial entrepreneur, and I wanted somebody that I could personally learn from, that had made money, lost money, bought businesses, sold businesses, had really been over the course. So bringing him in was really pivotal. And I think after a few board meetings, he kind of could, you know, he just observed the board and then had said, look, we need to really up our finance function and get a high-powered finance director in here. And if I'm honest, at that time, I was wincing a bit at what we'd have to pay, you know, because, you know, that was, you know, there was, other than ourselves, that there was nobody else in the business were earning, you know, that kind of money. And all of a sudden it was, well, that's so what we're...
Another senior executive.
Yeah, and I was seeing it as a big cost, and to get the right person, they're only going to come on the journey if they're going to get a slice of equity. So the concept of an EMI scheme, and, you know, it was, you know, but I was wise enough to know that you don't know what you don't know. So I kind of thought there's no point having these people around me if I don't listen to them. So so that's what we did. And it wasn't until the new finance director, Richie Clark, came in that I realised the power of a good finance director. And I think we were a really good team with him, the chairman, BGF. And I think what BGF also brought to the table was a lot of sort of questioning, and, you know, previously it was a bit of seat of the pants stuff, you know, we have an idea, we'll do this, we'll do that, right, let's go.
Yeah.
And then it was a little bit more structured after that.
And what did that finance director bring, right? Because I think you're right, like, a lot of entrepreneurs tend to be quite sort of creative, see an idea, opportunity, make it happen, more money's coming in than going out, that's what needs to be done. But what did that finance director kind of bring to the table? So
when it was just us before BGF, I had maxed everything credit line to the hilt. You know, we had a 1.2 million overdraft, which was constantly up against its limit. I'd HP'd as much as I could. You know, I'd really stretched, and I kind of had it in my head that if I'm not doing that, I'm not trying hard enough. You know, I'd borrowed, I'd levered, I'd pushed as hard as we could, and it did. It worked until that point. But then when our chairman came in, he sort of said, "Look, we're not running the business like that anymore." And when BGF would kind of, you know, it was all, you know, what's the return on capital, and, you know, opportunity that we could do something else with it. And our chairman said, "Look, you've got the drive and the vision, but what you need to do is use the finance director as a foil to articulate your vision into the numbers, so we can present it to the board in a fashion that makes sense and it's sensible." Because BGF's all for growth, but there's also an eye on the risk as well. So I always joke that Richard Pugh, who's our non-exec director, was the total opposite of me. He's super intelligent and loves the detail.
And what advice would you give, or maybe not advice, but what reflections do you have, like, taking finance and how that changed you kind of as a leader, and how did that sort of impact you, and what would you sort of tell other entrepreneurs, like how that will change you?
It's a really big step to make, and you can't underestimate when you've been a founder and been in charge and not had anybody to really answer to or consult. And I remember once we got into the process and the run up to doing the deal with BGF, I would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning with a shot of cortisol, thinking, about to give, part of the business away here. And once that's done, there's no going back, and you don't really know somebody's true colours until you're in bed with them, if you like. So I think the key really is just making sure, doing your diligence. I would always take the time, long before you're thinking about finance, to actually get to know who the potential investors are. Don't just go with one party, speak to them, go out for dinner, go for a few beers, because the people are really, really important. And we had, I'll not get into this story because it's too long, but when we were raising the finance for the plant, we'd entertained taking on private equity through another party, and we went through diligence with them, and it was us that pulled out at the 11th hour because we thought, no, this is not right for us. It's not how the journey started and the things that were going to happen. Once we got really into the nitty gritty of the term sheet, it was evident that they weren't going to be the partner for us.
And how do you sort of build? How do you undertake your own kind of due diligence then? I mean, you talk about going out for dinner there. Like, do you speak to other entrepreneurs about it, etc.?
Yeah, so that's exactly what I did. Just by coincidence, maybe BGF were very early. They hadn't been formed for that long, but I think I knew 3 or 4 of the companies that they'd invested in, just by chance of people being in my network. And I went and spoke to them and asked how they found them, and they all gave a glowing report. The other thing that was very comforting is that BGF can only ever have a minority stake in the business, as they're set up by the banks to fill that niche space. So that was a comfort. We didn't have the same worry that private equity is going to, if you don't hit your numbers, you'll get diluted and they'll take control, and before you know it, you've lost your company. So that was a comfort.
And fast forward then through this kind of like period of growth that you have, marching through England. You exited the business recently, so talk to us about how that kind of like process works and so on. And obviously you'd had sort of a few kind of experiences of it before, as we've touched on already.
Yeah.
What was different this time?
So obviously, as we started to get a bit of noise in the industry, we started to get known, the Keenan brand became quite strong. The door was starting to get knocked by private equity and some of the waste management companies with a view to acquiring us. But the time wasn't quite right because, as I said to you, in 2019 was too early. When we were in the middle of turmoil with COVID and Brexit and Ukraine, it wasn't the right time because the business wasn't in a position to sell. So once we fixed all that, came out the other side, we wanted to exit on our terms. So we did a beauty parade with some of the advisors at BGF's office in Edinburgh. And we picked KPMG predominantly because they put time and effort into us prior to the sale. They were showing us all the stuff they'd done in the industry, and we actually got to know them, and they'd become the sort of sector experts in the waste. So we got them to run a process. They did tell us, though, that it would be an easy business to sell. We did that in March. We put the IM out in October, and they said we'll be done by Christmas, but they were right, just the wrong Christmas. So it took us an extra year to sell it.
But I also remember you talking a bit about during COVID and so on, when growth wasn't as strong, that BGF didn't act like normal kind of private equity in terms of they could have diluted and so on. But actually, so just talk us through that a little bit as well.
Yeah, so as I said, we were in that position where we were trying to expand quickly, and we were fighting really 3 once-in-a-lifetime events that all happened at once. So there was COVID, which shut down our sector. When Brexit happened, a lot of our drivers left and the whole HGV market collapsed. So drivers' wages went from 24,000 a year to high 30s, 40 odd in the London areas. And then when Putin invaded Ukraine, the price of fuel went absolutely crazy. And to couple all that, the regulations were pushed back from 2023 to 2025. It was like, can anything else go wrong here? And we were expanding and we were burning cash. So we landed in a position where we'd really used that cash cushion that we had, and we were burning through the SAB grant. Now, fortunately, Virgin Bank were absolutely superb with us. I think, and this is part of the strength of having BGF at the table, was that I think the bank took a lot of comfort that, okay, they can see the strategy of the business. We've been going a long time. They understand the management team. They took time to understand what we were trying to do. Everybody could see it's not that the business has been mismanaged. It's just every business is in turmoil at the moment. So Clydesdale were exceptionally good. I think what you're alluding to there is we had a position with BGF where we had some loans that were to be redeemed, and we just didn't have the cash to pay them back when it was due. Now, if they were hard-nosed private equity, they could have just said, well, that's tough, we're going to take an equity strip and dilute us. But they never. They just said, look, we want a motivated management team. We're all in this together, so we'll just roll it, and when things pick up at the end, we'll get our money then. And then the other thing that they did, which is quite good, and it showed the confidence that they had in us in the business, was they said to us, look, we'd actually like to buy more of this business. And I was thinking, do you? Because we'd probably like to sell a bit. So what they did was we looked and said, well, who needs the cash just now? So not that my father needed the cash, but at his time in life, it was useful to him. So they agreed to buy half of his shareholding. So and what was quite good, I thought, was that we were trading here previously. We were now down here, so we just picked somewhere around there, and I think they worked on an arbitrary EBITDA figure, and it was a 6 or 7 times multiple, which was okay. So he walked away with a nice 7-figure sum, which was all upside because I'd paid his money back, and he still had equity in the business. And that took BGF from 30% to 40%. So they'd kind of maxed out what they wanted to do. But I thought, well, that shows confidence in the business. And they were right to do that, because on reflection, when you look at where we are now, that decision they took really paid off for them.
Do you think there's... I mean, what's it like sort of running a family business, right? Because you've got so many sort of different... So I was just thinking when you were talking about, I was like, gosh, there's so many different dynamics there that you're dealing with, and that BGF are also trying to kind of understand as well, right? It must just be, they clearly take the time to kind of get to know you, etc., and so on, right?
Yeah, I think I take my hat off to BGF, because I know they do specialise in the family business sector, and as an investor, it can't be easy investing in that sector, because at the end of the day, 9 out of 10 times the family will always stick together. So none of that happened in our business. We didn't have a single argument with BGF, but there's that family dynamic where you've got that social family side of things and then the business side of things. So I think as long as you're all of a certain emotional intelligence and got an appetite not to fall out, then it works. It worked for us. We had, my brother and I'll have arguments. My wife and I'll have arguments. My wife and my brother maybe have a bit of an argument, or my dad and my brother, or whatever. So it's trying to keep that separate and make sure that we don't fall out, because there is so many family businesses all fall out and people end up not speaking to each other ever again. But fortunately, it worked for us. But it is challenging, because you end up, you just live, sleep, breathe the business, and all you ever talk about is the business.
Yes. Yeah. I joke about I've got 3 kids under 5, so I joke all I do is work and parents. Whereas if I was running a business with a family as well, it would be even more kind of meshed together. Kind of expanding on the exit and so on. Like, what were the sort of things that you were taking into account? Because every entrepreneur that's kind of like listening to this, mind will drift to the exit from time to time anyway.
Yeah.
But what are the things that entrepreneurs need to know when sort of starting an exit process?
Yeah, so I think if you wind it right back, I was speaking to an entrepreneur who was at the beginning of his journey, and he's trying to raise money, and it's a bit like when we were trying to raise money. All you can see is the bit in front of you. This is a great idea. We need money for this, and we need someone to invest in it. And it's not till you get into that process where you have to have clarity to say, right, well, if an investor invests in the business, first of all, how are they going to get their money back? What's their return going to be? And when are they going to get it back? And what does it look like? And also, who's going to buy the business? So I personally think the thing to do is start at the end goal of visualizing, right, this is us selling the business, who's it going to be? And then work back the way to say, right, what are all the things we need to put in place to make this happen and make us attractive for that suitor to acquire the business. So the things that we took into consideration were, first of all, ability to deliver. Throughout the process, we got some crazy offers for the business. One was twice what anybody else had offered. And you can get carried away with that, but then it was all predicated on this, that, then buying other businesses, and then you think, well, this is probably not going to happen. And then thinking about who's really got the cash, who can afford it, who's got track record. So there's that deliverability, and also the cultural fit for the business. We spoke to a couple of potential acquirers that had offered with 8 offers for the business. And we thought, no, this is just not right. Our culture is not going to match. And the other thing was, I wanted to make sure that whatever the home becomes, that our employees are looked after. That it's not going to be a case of we walk off with a check, they all get sacked, and there's a big cost cutting exercise, and it evaporates. So that was all important. And
was the sort of sustainability aspect presumably quite important in that factor as well? Because you create this great sustainable business, sustainable and focused on sustainability as well. Like, how did that sort of factor in as well?
It's very important, and that comes down to the values. So we're on as I said to you before, a net zero journey to decarbonise by 2030. So if that didn't fit with a buyer who just basically said, oh, that's going out the window, we're buying diesel trucks, that simply wouldn't have worked. And we looked at some private equity offers as well, but the problem with that was that we were going to be tied in for 5 years minimum, which we didn't really want to be, and there was no synergies. It was a pretty hard graft. The beauty of BIFFA is that if you look at, we're both got a national business, we're both running trucks, so you overlap the two together, and you say, oh, we could take all these trucks out here, we can move this, that, 2 and 2 suddenly make 7. Yep. They've got workshops up and down the country that we can use, and it becomes extremely attractive. And they've got the same culture, values and ethos. They really look after their people. So I knew it was going to be a good home for the business. Yeah,
really interesting. And so we talked a bit about the family aspects of the business. So what did your brother and wife do in it as well?
Yeah, so Gregor, my brother, ran our facilities. So we had the big one, which is in Aberdeen, and we had a smaller one just outside Glasgow, a depackaging operation, which we actually carved out and sold prior to the deal to get more of the asset value of the place, because it was worth a lot, but it wasn't generating enough EBITDA on a multiple to get so, but it was valuable. So we carved that out. So he ran both of them. He still runs the facility. And my wife Claire, she went and trained as a transport manager. So she's got a difficult job. She's really built the business and grown it. She's taken us national. She runs all the transport fleet, so all the transport managers report into her. So she's really been key in that growth.
Big job. Big job.
Yeah. I just take the credit. I'm just in the photographs.
It's just, photograph of the podcast, etc. Brilliant. Grant, thanks so much for coming on BGF's Good Growth podcast. It's been really interesting to hear your story.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks for listening to the Good Growth podcast. If you enjoyed that, make sure to hit subscribe so you're the first to hear about new episodes. And always stay up to date on the latest growth insights.